Welcome everybody to tonight's program. It is 7 p.m. and so we are going to get started. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jessica McDonald. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Corvallis, your host for this evening's program on missing middle housing. Before we jump into presentations and discussion about missing middle, we felt that it would be good to have sort of a primer for everyone here to get used to some of the basics. What are we talking about when we say missing middle? So courtesy of some of our affordable housing friends up in Vancouver, BC, we have a 2-minute video that we are going to share with you all at this time. I hope you all enjoyed that video. It's a great introduction to the topic at hand this evening. And as I fumble for the right PowerPoint to start with this evening, first of all, I want to welcome you to tonight's program on missing middle housing. Again, my name is Jessica McDonald. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Corvallis. And let's get these Zoom tips out of the way. First of all, you're going to be able to ask questions through the Q&A box anytime. Start putting those in. Maybe you have a question just right away, right off the bat. Put those in, as well as throughout. We will have Q&A time at the end. This is a webinar setting, as you can tell. Sit back, relax. No need to have your video on, eat your dinner while you're learning about missing middle housing. This meeting is being recorded and will be available following the presentation on the League's YouTube channel. The League of Women Voters, we are a nonpartisan education and advocacy organization. At the core of who we are and what we do is empowering voters and defending democracy. What do I love about the League? There's so many things. I love that we work on issues that impact our communities. our families, our neighbors. From voting rights to climate change and community planning and programs like tonight's on housing. If you're out there in the Zoom world thinking, how do I get involved in my community? I'm really interested in affordable housing. Where can I find a voice? Well, I'm here to tell you that you can find your voice at the League of Women Voters. We welcome you with open arms and hope that you get involved if you're interested. Tonight's program is co-sponsored by two league committees, our housing committee, as well as our community planning committee. Thanks to all of the stellar volunteers that put on tonight's program and coordinated with the speakers. I think that every one of us here can agree that access to affordable housing is a real, concrete issue that we see in Corvallis and Benton County every day. Our family members, friends, our colleagues, ourselves find it harder and harder to find safe and secure housing at an affordable price. So today we're talking about missing middle housing. They're called missing because they have typically been often illegal to build since the 40s and 50s. And they're called middle because they sit in the middle of a spectrum between detached single family homes, mid-rise to high-rise apartment buildings. Also middle in terms of form and scale, as well as number of units and often affordability. As we look towards the needs to diversify the mix of housing types to meet differing income and generational needs, this is where missing middle housing can change the conversation. We are also in a unique position since the passage of House Bill 2001, expanding opportunities for building middle housing in areas that previously had been restricted to single family housing types. Tonight, we'll hear from three noted speakers, providing unique perspectives on this issue. First, we'll be hearing from Paul Bilotta, City of Corvallis Community Development Director. Paul is gonna give us the backstory on middle housing right here in Corvallis. You know, what is our story on middle housing in our own community? Next, we'll hear from Carl Price, City Planning Commissioner. Carl will help us think about examples beyond Corvallis, including reflections on exciting new ways that missing middle is playing out in other cities. And to round us off, we'll hear from Ryan Long, local real estate agent, who will give us a buyer's perspective in terms of housing variety and middle housing interest and demand. With that, I welcome Paul Bilotta to the virtual microphone. And thank you for joining us, Paul. And I'll pass the baton.
All right, thank you, Jessica. We'll try to get this up here. All right. I'm Paul Bilotta, the Community Development Director for the City of Corvallis. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of middle housing in Corvallis, and also talk a little bit about what's in front of the city right now as far as the state mandate on middle housing. I will caution everybody that one of our speakers is Carl Price. He is one of our planning commissioners, and as luck would have it, we are in the middle of the hearing on this particular topic, and so he's not we have to be very careful about what we say in front of him because we don't want to taint that process. And so what I'm going to be talking about middle housing as it relates to Corvallis are things that just relate to the state mandate and not anything that Mr. Price would be able to make a vote one way or the other on. So we're also going to try to keep questions today away from the topic of anything that's actually proposed in Corvallis because of that issue. But if you have any questions about that, you can contact the city staff and we'll be able to help you on that. So in Corvallis and in the state, middle housing is defined as duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, and cottage clusters. These are some examples, fairly recent examples in the city. We did choose a cottage cluster from Washington because we haven't had any recent cottage clusters in Corvallis. We do have some older ones around town. The state is mandating that duplexes must be allowed everywhere that a single family home is allowed. So if you're in a neighborhood that has single family homes, this affects you. Also, other middle housings other middle housing, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, and cottage clusters are also allowed in all areas where single family homes are allowed. There's a model code that the state put out that kind of sets what the baseline standards are. We can adopt standards that are less restrictive than the model code, but we can't really exceed the standards of the model code. So that sets a baseline. In Corvallis, we have a series of zones for residential along the top here, but you can see that a lot of the middle housing are things that we have had before. RS6 in the middle there is our kind of our main primary zone since 2006, and it already allows duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, even fiveplexes, townhomes. And although we have cottage clusters not allowed, it really does allow cottage clusters, but there's some other standards that we decided to be cautious and put it in that way. RS5 also allows triplexes, but not fourplexes, so that's why we showed that one not being there. The main zone that has a lot of change coming to it is the RS 3.5, which is our legacy single family zone that only allows pretty much single family homes and has larger setbacks and things. So where are these zones? This is all the residential zones that low density residential zones except for RS6, which is the one that is almost in line with middle housing mandates now. So you can see that on the north end of town, that's kind of up in the northwest a lot. You get the southwest part of town. When we get into South Corvallis, I'm having to do some of this by memory because everybody's faces are sitting over my map in my in my world. But you can see that again, the Southwest and a large part of South Corvallis is also in those zones. Who has been working on this project? We did have a community advisory committee, and they met several times throughout the pandemic on this. And then the city council and planning commission have also had work sessions on this topic. We did have an online public open house. It was early on, kind of in the mid part of the pandemic, and what we learned was that we actually reached a whole lot more people through the online methods, so that was good. And we do have a project website. If you just put in middle housing in our web page, it'll come up. Why is this important for Corvallis? One of the things with Corvallis is that in the recent times we've had a lot of it's become increasingly hard to live in Corvallis. Affordability has declined. We are the least affordable community in the state by the state standard. But when you look at this map, this is looking at commuting since about the turn of the century, a little bit after that. You can see in about 2000, we had roughly an even balance between people who are driving into Corvallis every day and working here, people who live and work in Corvallis, and people who live in Corvallis and work somewhere else. That's a nice balance for a community. It's fairly rare, but it's when the community is a complete community and works that way. As you look to the 2 decades since, what's happened is that we really have the same number of people living and working in Corvallis. We have the same number of people living in Corvallis and working outside of Corvallis, but the number of people who live outside of Corvallis and commute in every day has grown dramatically. Why is that happening? Is it just that Corvallis is not a good place to live anymore? No, there's a reason for that. You can see that for about 3 decades, we've stopped, for all practical purposes, putting out additional land to accommodate the growth. The way that feels to community members a lot of times is that growth is taking off. You hear a lot about, oh my gosh, the university expanded enrollment and those sorts of things. But when you look at the actual population growth over time, our biggest growth period was in the 1960s. We added about 15,000 people to the community at that time. Since 1980 to 2020, it's actually been pretty stable with about 5,000 more people coming in every decade. So it's really all that feeling you're getting is on the supply demand. It's the demand side of things that's causing that discomfort. Now we're going to jump back in time and look at Corvallis and what Corvallis has done about middle housing since the beginning. Originally in Corvallis, there was no zoning. You could do what you wanted to do. We didn't have setbacks. We didn't tell people what uses they could put on lots. You just figured out how to put it up and you put it up. So when you look at the parts of the community that are around the downtown area, our historic districts, a lot of those neighborhoods were created without any controls, very few controls at all. Then in the 1930s, we jumped on the zoning bandwagon, which had started on the east part of the country. And we had a whopping 2 residential zones. One residential zone allowed single family and duplexes. So we were already doing some middle housing from the beginning. And then the other zone allowed all other residential types. So from the beginning, we didn't really start off with a single family only zone. Then in the post-World War II period, the 50s and 60s, everybody came home, the GI Bill, a lot of housing, a lot of large production housing started around the country. And what happened across the country and also in Corvallis is we started making our zones more narrow. We started creating more zones and narrowing them down to how many units, how many big, how big can they be, getting very, very picky. And so that's when you started to see single family only zones come into existence. By about the 1990s, we started to reconsider that thought, and that maybe these zones themselves, we shouldn't just have a whole bunch of zones for one particular type of building, but maybe we should start mixing it up a little bit. And so we started putting in zones like RS6, which has up to 5 units in it. We have a lot of things like housing variety for projects that are a certain size to get different things in. But it's important to note too that even back in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, we still weren't really doing that single family only suburban thing. We just were doing it in a different way. So like in the Timber Hill area, that is not a single area of single family homes. There was requirements to have a certain number of duplexes. We have other zones that we brought in. So down in the lower part of Timber Hill, you've got multifamily units that are in that location. When you look at some of our other big projects in the community, Grand Oaks, also not just single family homes. It has other types of things in there. Willamette Landing is very mixed. That's kind of the first one that sort of straddles the new code a little bit. Sylvia off of Philomath Boulevard that went in 3 or 4 years ago, also mixture of housing. Russell Gardens that's going in on 53rd, Crescent Highlands, which is going in up Kings right now, and Ponderosa Ridge up in the Northwest. All of those have a variety of housing in them. So we really don't have a good example of what House Bill 2001 is trying to really go after, which is that suburban only, single family only kind of concept. So if you want to know what it is going to look like, look around because we already have it here. A good location to look at, people are worried about, yeah, but what if we take the restrictions off? A good neighborhood to look at there is the Barley Hill neighborhood. That neighborhood is RS6. So it's already had the full range of middle housing allowed in it, but continues to be how it is. And then get ready to pass over. These are the people you want to talk to. If you do have other questions, you want to know about the middle housing code update, there's a lot of information in that link up there. But if you really want to stump somebody on the really tricky detail questions, Jason Yike is the one you want to talk to because he wrote a lot of the code himself. But I'm also available if you have any detailed questions as well. There is as Commissioner Price mentioned, I guess he mentioned it before the meeting. There is a public hearing that will be happening at this council level. So even though the public hearing at the Planning Commission is closed, if you do want to get involved in this process, there is another public hearing that will be coming forward in the next few weeks. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. That was really informative. I also really enjoy seeing some of those historical photos bringing Corvallis to light. Before I pass this off to Carl, there was just one question I thought maybe quickly you could respond to, which was a question on, is there any response to that drop in commuters in 2015? Do you have any idea of, there was kind of a hiccup on that chart, what that was due to?
We can't say for sure, but that was the time when the retreat came on board. One of the things that has been interesting is watching, a lot of the activity is around student housing. People, are always students moving in, where are the students going, everything. As we've started to see some of these larger student housing projects, what's happened, we hear a lot through the neighborhood associations, qualitative, a lot of those student rentals are kind of sliding back in closer to the university because the students are moving to these bigger projects, and those are then converting over to other household types. And so you get a little bit of this back and forth. We see it, we saw it with the Domain and Washington Yard that just opened too. There's an initial boom, and then it starts to transition back over, and the single families tend to move into other characters. We did see in the last shot that a lot of we've heard qualitatively that there are a lot of people displaced by the wildfires have actually located into what used to be student rentals, single family homes in the community.
Great, thanks, Paul. I'd like to now turn it over to Carl Price to get us thinking about examples beyond our community. And thanks also to Paul for already kind of putting that plug in that Carl plays a special role as a commission member. And so acknowledging that we will not be focusing in his talk and in questions, certainly on local land use issues that are pending right now. I'm going to hand it over to you, Carl. Welcome.
Thank you. My name's Carl Price, and I've been interested in the middle housing for quite a while, probably really getting into it in depth. And when I was part of the Housing and Community Development Advisory Board that we used to have in Corvallis, and we'd get people in from there talking about, not having the type of housing available widely that they wanted to have. And so tonight I want to touch on just a few things. And as you can see, I have the same picture. This is a very common picture if you are searching middle housing and some of the things on the internet, which there's a lot of really good information out there. And one of the things I had seen that I really liked was a definition from, this is from the Sierra Club, when they were talking and working with middle housing in Maryland. And it's talking about what is middle housing. And, it's the type of housing that is not the single family and is not the large living spaces that you would think of as normal apartment living. It's those middle pieces, like when you want to downsize after your kids have left home, when you first get out of college and you're starting to establish yourself, maybe with a roommate. But we have a lot of places lost the ability to bring these into our neighborhoods and keep that community within the neighborhood as they move through the phases of their life. And that's important. And I'll talk about that a little later. I wanted to open up with some pictures though. These are from around both our country and up in Canada, which feels very similar in laws and everything else with us. And they're seeing some of the housing crisis more severe than we are right now. So you can learn a lot from them. But, these buildings aren't out of place in our communities. They're very nice. These cottage clusters, I became enamored with the thought of cottage clusters a while back, even for, ideas on how I would want to live in one as I aged out of a single family home. The triplexes, people really fear triplexes, but some of these look like they would fit right into our current existing neighborhoods and hardly be noticed, and would a lot of times be fought to protect if we had them in our neighborhoods, right? We would have people fighting to make sure they stayed historical. And then we get to live work. And these are, you can do, they sometimes drift towards cottage clusters. sometimes drift towards mixed use. But they're a really interesting piece of a puzzle in keeping people in their neighborhoods. But I was asked a little bit, and this touching base on climate and how does this help our climate? And I wanted to touch on just a few things. Oregon land use. In the 70s, Oregon decided that we wanted to really preserve our farm and forest, our nature. And so we've passed a lot of laws that brought population into cities while preserving and making it hard to do urban sprawl. And you can see where that helps the climate. One, it keeps our forests, it keeps our farms. But two, it keeps us from having to drive from 5, 10, 15, 20 miles away to get into where we work and buy groceries and take our kids to school. The next part in climate from this is it tends to move us towards a walkable city, an area where we can be neighborly, where we can potentially have mixed uses, where we don't need to get into our cars to do everything that we may want to do during the day. A good example of that in Corvallis now is the people I've talked to who've lived down around Sam Station, and how they love to be able to just stroll in, get a coffee, stroll back home, sit on their porch, those kind of things. Those are really, really valuable things to start building a community that doesn't depend on a vehicle so much. And then, as Paul said, the commuters in. Just giving the people who wish to live in Corvallis the opportunity to live in Corvallis, to make use of our land so that they can come into our town and live in our towns. So now we get into housing diversity, housing choice, and housing stability. And part of this is, how do we make housing, and especially neighborhoods, that appeal to people throughout all the phases of their life, and that can be affordable to people to live in during those phases. And so, for example, you get a young person out of college, a couple wants to move into a small rental or a small, duplex, a small cottage, and then they have a family and they want a family home. And as your family grows, they wish to downsize. And so they'd like to find, again, a smaller place that they can downsize into. And when I was on HCDAB, we kept getting people coming in saying, I can't find in my neighborhood the type of small house that I'd like to downsize into, so that I could stay in my neighborhood, so that I could be around my friends, my neighbors, the area that I have grown in as a family, and I'd like to stay in there, but they can't do it. And so we heard a lot of people saying, so they're staying in their homes or family homes as an elderly couple. And that tends to cause a lockup that used to free up when people wanted to downsize, of a family home available for a family to buy into and move up out of, a rental duplex, for example. And lately, we've been hearing a lot from teachers, nurses, city workers, that they can't afford to buy in Corvallis. They can't find a place to buy in Corvallis. And so we get a lot of people that the city truly depends on to thrive, having to commute into Corvallis. And it's a problem that we have the opportunity now to start addressing and grabbing. And I think as we go forward, we can look forward and see much more opportunity. We can take advantage of what the state's doing, and maybe just maybe become the example, the shining star in Oregon, that when the legislature goes to do something, they have an example of what's working and working well. And I would love to see Corvallis be that town. And this gets me to the point where I said before, I've got this, have had this passion growing on cottage clusters. And I see those as ways for people to downsize with friends as they age in. I see in a neighborhood the ability for a group of people to buy a piece of property and build a cluster with an auxiliary building. Think of people that like to quilt, and they build small homes that they're comfortable in and build a auxiliary clubhouse, for the lack of words, in a cluster where they could have a quilting with their friends. And as retired people, they go over and quilt. I had a friend who has sadly passed away years ago, but he was really, really deeply into kinetic sculptures in Corvallis. And the idea that you could potentially bring people like that together with a workshop for doing kinetic sculptures in a nice, airy community building while having the smaller clusters around them to live in, or to live in while they work together to advance art. These are really, in my mind, ideas that we should be thriving in Corvallis, making Corvallis not just the community that it is, but encouraging our artists, our elderly to stay in Corvallis and retire here and live here. And that requires housing diversity and housing choices. And it creates a housing stability in neighborhoods that we can have people spend their lives happily. And I think that's a big win in Corvallis that Corvallis could grab. And so, just as a little bit of humor, we always hear these things, the NIMBYs and the YIMBYs. But I was listening to a video, and there was two that I really thought were funny. And so I wanted to end this all on a kind of a light note. And that is the nopes and the bananas. The nope is the not on planet Earth. And the bananas is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And I hope we can start to become not these things, that we accept diversity into our community and that we get excited about it. And that we can, I'm going to go back to some of the examples here on the slides. We can start to encourage communities. This one in the upper right corner on a 50 by 120 lot. Those are not uncommon in Corvallis. 5 residential units, 2 large shared artist studios and workshops that they do both the artists that live on site work in and have the classes for the community. I think that's a really neat thing that we can start to work towards in our communities. Thank you very much for your time tonight. And I'll be glad to answer any questions. I could probably speak on most of these subjects for hours. I have a fairly strong passion on it. So as long as it doesn't touch on the actual land use in front of us, I'm really excited to speak to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. I have parents who are trying to downsize and move to Corvallis and have been trying for 2 years and have not been able to find housing here that is affordable and fits their needs. I hear you. I think many of us are in that same boat.
It's a common story as you listen to people, and that's hard.
Yep. I wanted to note that if you have questions, looks like several people have found the Q&A box and some questions are coming in, but just wanted to say if anybody came in late, that is the avenue for asking your questions through the Q&A box. The chat is disabled, and so we're just driving all questions to that Q&A box. And then I also wanted to just say really quickly that we have examples and even some links maybe on these slides. And if we're able to collect them from the speakers afterwards and put them in a PDF, we'll happily put them on the league website on the event page here so that attendees would be able to go and access those and find those links. So I just wanted to mention that because there was a question. All right, finally, we would like to hear from Ryan Long, who's going to give us a unique perspective on home buyers in our community. Welcome, Ryan.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you to the League for inviting me tonight. My name is Ryan Long. I work with the Sue Long Realty Group, part of the Keller Williams Realty office here in Corvallis. And I work primarily as a buyer's agent and also focus on working with investors. And so I do get to have, dozens of conversations a week and hundreds of conversations every month with different buyers and their needs and what's going on. So that's why the League decided to invite me. So thank you very much. Some of the things were, kind of talked about as far as why we're in, the situation that we're in. It's not a unique situation. Corvallis having a larger demand than supply. And so just going to speak to that real quick. As Carl mentioned, we are underbuilt with restrictive annexations. There's the permitting and urban growth boundaries here in Corvallis. And so that has restricted the area available, just not as much land to build on. And so builders, developers, a lot of times have gone to surrounding communities and built there.
Ryan?
Yes.
It looks like the screen has not shared yet. It is still black. So
okay.
Wanted to let you know.
Oh, thank you very much. Let me try. Oh, is that sharing now? No?
Not yet.
Okay, let me try one more time here.
There it goes.
Okay. Thank you for that. So yes, supply and demand, obviously some of the biggest factors that are creating this housing crunch that we're in. And again, not unique to Corvallis, some of the issues. So kind of highlighting a few of the things that we're seeing on the supply side. Nationally, I see a lot of numbers thrown out, but very common to see that we're about 5.5 million units dwelling short in the US. And so there's a huge need around. Corvallis put out a report in 2018, and I want to say that number in Corvallis at that point, they said we're close to 3,600 units short at that point, even a few years ago, and that's only increased from what I've seen. So the supply side, we're underbuilt here. We had a lot of people after the Great Recession, a lot of developers and builders and complementary industries there retire or go to other things after there was such a decrease in demand nationally. And now, unfortunately, that's come to bite us, and we're underbuilt by quite a few units. On the demand side, some of the the unique things in Corvallis we've talked about is Oregon State enrollment has gone up. And one of the interesting factors that I think that we see is that we just hit the average age of millennials last year at 33. And so we look at the bell curve of the age there. They were 33 last year, and that also corresponds to the average age of a first-time home buyer. And so people, so that was also a reason for that we've seen an increase in demand over the last few years. COVID has changed a lot of things for so many people. And so work from home factors, people can really move. And so we are seeing in Corvallis, people moving from Seattle, Portland, Bay Area, Northern California to move here people are able to retire early, as they're not retire early, but plan for their retirement early. So even I'm seeing a lot of people moving from out of the city, out of state, to move to Corvallis and similar communities, because that's where the kind of place they want to retire to, a smaller town as well. So a lot of those things are at low interest rates during COVID has really, created the lowest amount of homes available in Corvallis in really, the 40 years that I've seen data for. So we're, as of, a couple of weeks ago, we were less than a month of inventory. We consider and that means if, the number of homes that are under contract continue to go under contract and no more homes are listed, then we'd only have homes for a month. We see that a 6-month number is a balanced market between buyers and sellers. The last few years, we've been consistently under 3 months and really 1 to 2 months the last couple of years, but that has even dropped in the last few months to the lowest levels we've seen. So number one, there's a huge demand for housing. Carl made some good points about, people's life cycles needing different things at different points in their life. And so some numbers that I found that I thought were interesting here. Sorry. Okay. Let me get this back here. Thinking about single family homes versus other types of homes, condos, townhouses. Here's a breakdown nationally. Yes.
Just one, it looks like the graph is not full. So we're just seeing a slice of that graph.
Oh no. Okay.
There we go. Is it type of homes purchased? Is that the title? Great. Now it is all on that slide. Thank you.
Okay. I know that there's a lot of small figures, so I'm just going to highlight a couple things on here. Number one, the average across the nation is that 81% of buyers in 2020, that's the most recent numbers I have, 81% purchased single family homes. And so we had about, the highest percentage of people looking for single family homes was 31 to 40, which, I think might make sense as people hit their prime age for having young children and that sort of thing. And they might want a yard and other aspects like that. But you can see, hopefully on this graph, that it does decline. And we see those alternative forms of homes that people are purchasing going up as people age and mature too. So, to Carl's point about wanting different kinds of home opportunities, but maybe not having those as you age, I think is something that Corvallis is certainly missing. So, talking through that. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the things that I'm seeing here in Corvallis as well. We talked about Ponderosa Ridge and some of these other developments, Russell Gardens as being some current developments that have a mix of single family homes and duplexes, basically purchasing a 0 lot line property or half of a duplex. And what I've seen there is that currently, and I just talked to Ponderosa Ridge this week, they've got waiting lists for people purchasing the single family homes of anywhere from likely about 9 to 15 months is how long you would wait if you decided you wanted to live up there right now and have a home built. And for the attached homes, those 0 lot line homes, it would be more like 3 to 4 months. And so they are, in my opinion, that does show that there is more, while there's more demand for single family homes, we still have a very high demand for those attached homes, those alternative missing middle type of homes here in Corvallis. Let's see here. What else? So, one of the questions that the league asked me to address here is what could happen with home values. There's a lot of, obviously a lot of people that are, we want homes, we want options, we want affordability for our community. But when it comes back down to it, there's a lot of people that say, yeah, not in my backyard. There's that NIMBY attitude. And so at the end of the day, it is very hard to say what's going to happen. and every property is certainly different. But, kind of thinking through some of the things that I see happening with needs and development are, number one, most of these are these alternative homes, this missing middle homes, I believe will be built as primarily to be rented out. Hopefully there will be some more homes to be purchased as well to give affordable options for people to purchase. But I think a lot of them will be built and then rented. And so we've got a healthy demand from investors to buy in this area. They've seen rents go up. There's a lot of demand. I mean, I put a rental home on the market just a month ago, and 30 inquiries. As I talk to other investors, I hear that number sometimes at 40, 50, 60, 80 inquiries for a single listing that they put up for rent. So we've got a huge demand for affordable rentals here in the community. But as we think about, where are those prime locations to be built, there's a few factors that go into it, as we see with even in Russell Gardens, Ponderosa Ridge, where they've decided to build the attached homes. They are along the busier streets, and so that is common. I believe we're going to see more in our urban core. That's more walkable type areas. We're going to see more closer to campus, and so. And also on homes that are maybe a small home on a larger lot would also be a prime place or prime location for a developer to come in and decide to rebuild. And so thinking through that, I don't think that a lot of people that are concerned or worried about, this not in my backyard attitude, less people are going to be affected, I think, than some people think. Homes and lots that are in these higher priced developments or higher priced areas, it's not going to make sense for a developer to go in and tear down a nice home there and all of a sudden build a fourplex or put it on real expensive ground. It's going to make a lot more sense for them to raise a home that's decrepit, that hasn't been kept up, that they could get at a discount and scrape that to build a home, or someplace where there's a lot more demand because people want a walkable spot and are more likely to really be a rental specific type area. So I think that's going to be a big factor, and a lot of people that are worried about a duplex, a fourplex going up, it's not going to affect their values. It's not going to happen in those locations that they're as concerned about. On the other hand, too, when people have options with their land, it becomes more valuable as well. So I believe in general, it's not going to hurt values. In fact, in those eligible areas, values of homes and their land will both increase. So a couple things to think about there as well. And I, thinking through, all these aspects and what people really want, I polled some colleagues and asking what they see with buyers. At the end of the day, people do, the home buyers and people that are truly in the market, a vast majority of those home buyers are looking for single family homes, traditional homes. It's why they come to communities like Corvallis that are in general less dense. But they also want affordable options, and there's a lot of people that are buying these attached homes. One other question that was posed to me prior to this is, what percentage of people are looking in Corvallis but end up buying in other communities? And it happens all the time. I would say a solid 20% of the people that I work with that come to me saying, I'm going to buy in Corvallis, I want to look in Corvallis, they end up buying in one of our surrounding communities and, commuting and driving. I don't think Carl got to it, but, he mentioned to me in a previous conversation that increases the footprint on our environment when so many more people are commuting from a distance. There's less walkability, less of those environmentally friendly type of living situations. So being able to live more densely for people that are willing to do it is going to be a big benefit to our community as well. So those are some of the main things. I'm happy to take questions too, and excited to see what the league is got questions about. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ryan. I learned several things during your talk, and including, it was interesting thinking about those generational bell curves and how those people come into home ownership age, and how we see those ages flow in and out and affect housing availability.
And Carl, just to speak to that one more time, Carl also mentioned, we right now with such low inventory and, people staying in their homes longer because there's not other places to use or maybe not as many options. It really is kind of, it's backing things up and creating less fluid market, and that's why we're having some of these problems of less options, less inventory. And so it would be great to have more examples of options. I have so many people asking me about tiny homes and all these kind of things, but there's no zoning that allows for building several tiny homes. So I'm really excited about the cottage cluster idea as well. I know there's a lot of people that want to develop those kind of communities within our community, and a lot of people looking at those living options too. So
great, thank you. Well, as audience members, as you get your questions into the chat box, first I'm going to wrap up with the speakers by asking you all a question that you might take 30 seconds up to a minute to respond to, which is essentially, what do you want people to walk away here this evening thinking about middle housing? And I go back to Paul and go back the same route.
Sure. I would say that the couple things. One is there's a lot of fear around this right now, and take away that we've been with middle housing since the beginning of Corvallis. And so when you're trying to figure out what may happen, we have parts of town where you can look at and it could have happened now. So that's kind of what it's going to be. Second one is going to be, people are worried about the rate of change in neighborhoods. And really that is in our control, because on the demand side, when you allow demand to go somewhere and you identify where that should go, like we have recently with some large student housing projects and things, you can pull demand throughout the community. But when you don't, if you just sit and kind of deny and try to fight it, then it's into the market bidding each other out, and people end up in places where they don't want to be. I did a lot of consulting with college communities, and students generally don't want to be in single family homes. They want to be in buildings with a bunch of other students. And when they end up in college communities, it's because we didn't do something. And in Corvallis, we didn't identify any high density residential land for over 20 years. And so that multifamily product turned into something else.
Thanks, Paul. Carl.
So I would say, like Paul, I've heard a lot of fear over the years on this, and I would hope that we could take away hope and optimism. I want the community to be excited to grow. I want us to look at what's coming and get ahead of it and do it in a way that preserves Corvallis as a wonderful place to live. I want us, like I said, to be the shining star in Oregon that the legislature looks at, because the legislature is going to act again. This is considered a crisis all the way up to the national level. And if we can get ahead of it, we can be that example that is done in a way that is really good and not be in the position to react. So I would hope that people come with ideas on how to make everybody accepted in the diversity of housing, and come to it with optimism and hope and a vision forward, and not fear of losing, but hope of gaining a better community out of it.
Thank you, Carl. Ryan.
I'd probably leave you with that, as they say, variety is the spice of life. And so, just having a community that has a lot of options for a lot of different kinds of people is really going to make a much more wonderful community. I do see some of my friends, I went to high school, I grew up here. They've wanted to move back, but they've ended up in other communities around here because of the affordability. We want our kids to be able to come back and move and live and stay here in Corvallis. On the flip side, we want our parents to stay and live here and have those options. So the more homes that are available, the more options that people have, I think it's just going to only add to our community. So thank you.
Thanks. Well, as I turn to questions, I have a couple, it looks like, that came in around a similar topic. So I'm going to start there, which is around the existing townhouses, multiplexes that have gone up in the last several years that people are seeing as primarily targeted and resided in by students. And so as we think about how to have those kinds of opportunities for people at all ages of their life and different opportunities for retirees and people with younger families to be able to utilize those same types of townhouse styles, how does that change from where it is student oriented currently? Any thoughts? And I'm not sure, I'll say whoever has the first, I don't know, something to say about that, but maybe Carl.
So I've said this a few times. I wish we would have had our code in place so that the desirable student housing wasn't a single family home with rented out rooms. If we would have had triplexes, fourplexes, even if you have students in them, at least a family, a single parent, somebody else can rent into that unit, one of the spaces. When you have what we have gotten in Corvallis, which is we restricted that type of building, so the developers went to developing shared housing situations, which students have no problem living in, but a family does. We've squoze our families out. And so I would love to see us bring back the type of housing that families can get into at some point. Will we ever win? The students will. I think the students always win a bidding war because they have money that they don't understand is going to hurt them the rest of their lives with student loans. And so they can tend to win a bidding war. And that's part of the supply demand curve. Until you get that supply meeting our demand, we're going to have a problem. And as Director Bilotta said, if you can steer some of that demand into appropriate housing, then the students go there and it opens up some of these other types of units for families.
Thanks, Carl. Paul or Ryan, do you also want to chime into that question?
Yeah, I would say one other thing is important is when you have the regulations and if you create incentives to do something. And a lot of times it's when you put in regulations to try to prevent something, you really need to put in regulations to try to encourage something. So a lot of what happened around there too was we put regulations in place almost a decade ago now that increased parking requirements for multifamily, for attached type units. And so you couldn't put as much on a lot because it had to be dedicated to parking, and they were pretty severe parking requirements. And so the market then went to where they could get the most building on a lot, which was the single family. If they were balanced, then the market would have chosen whatever unit type it actually really wanted. But we created such an advantage for the single family home over other types with parking. And that's one of the things the state is clamping down on with the middle housing, is that you can't create those standards where single family gets a big advantage over the attached. But that's why we saw that.
One question for, I think, clarification that has been asked is, what is affordable housing? What is the amount that we're talking about in general in Corvallis?
Yeah, generally what the method you use, I mean, there's a lot of complicated ways to say it, but the easiest way to say it is if you're spending more than a third of your income on housing, that's generally viewed to be unaffordable.
And I'd like to say middle housing isn't targeted to affordable housing. That's a different target and goal set. We're talking about just housing people who have been squeezed, and the squeeze has happened. We would love to see it become affordable. But I think when this state passed middle housing and what we've seen nationally, it's the nation has focused on affordable housing, single family housing, and great big housing complexes, leaving that middle out. The places that could, who wanted cheaper housing than single family, but it wouldn't necessarily fall into, say, HUD's affordable housing quality. And so I think when we speak on middle housing, we don't want to confuse it with what is normally spoken on affordable housing, because they tend to be two different things and have different goals in mind.
Thanks, Carl. One, I think, related question to that one of our audience members asked is, how do we convince developers to build missing middle housing if it isn't the most profitable thing for developers to build?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, making sure and talking to various developers to find out why that is, and to make sure that there isn't something like our current parking problem in our code that's driving people in one direction. Another one that can happens is the number of people that want to buy versus rent. Sometimes mortgage products lean one way versus the other. Currently right now, as Ryan mentioned, there's a huge demand for single family homes because we've been at historically low interest rates. You start getting interest rates up to 4.5, 5, 6, you'll see that there's formulas, and that will switch back over.
And it may not be developers all the time. You as a family may have kids growing that you want to build a row of triplex or a townhome to keep your kids next to and have multi-generational. It may be some of these things will be driven by not developers, but by the community as they see what they can do. And we've seen that in other places. California has seen quite a bit of that recently. Up in Vancouver, Canada, BC, they did some rules like this recently, and they saw a lot of individuals start focusing on bringing duplexes with a mother-in-law cottage, an alley, they call it an alley cottage, in. And so, yes, we want to see developers start doing some of this, but it's not always developers who will drive it. Sometimes it's the community driving. Like I said, with cottage clusters, those are the type of developments that will be driven by people who want to live together like that.
Yeah, there's one other thing I'd add to it. Back a million years ago, I was a market researcher, and people always think that whatever's right in front of them is what's hot, and that's all people want to do. You always need to think of real estate as being that there are several buyers in line, and it's just the one who's in front who won the deal. There's only one person who can take it. And so like with housing, when we were doing a few years ago, the high density residential rezoning to add more, people were saying, oh my gosh, that's just going to be more student housing. Why are you doing that? But that was the highest paying bidder. There were still people out there that wanted to build senior housing and affordable housing, but they were always in second or third place. And then you don't get anything. As soon as we expanded that supply of high density housing, what did we see? We've got an affordable housing project of 100 units going in right now off of 53rd. Further up, it wasn't in the rezoning, but we have a senior housing project now going up off of Kings. So you do see, as you saturate, real estate goes through saturation phases, and you have to saturate that first market, and then you'll start to get those second and third markets behind.
Great point. Kind of along this question is maybe Ryan, how can people that are interested in getting into this world of maybe collaborating with some other individuals and families on something like purchasing a cottage cluster or doing a project in that realm, Are there co-buying opportunities, or sort of what is your thoughts on how people might be able to come together around that?
Yeah, well, two things. I have read quite a few articles saying, co-buying is becoming much more common to see, several singles going together to purchase a property, or a couple smaller families going to purchase a single family home. I have not personally seen quite as much of that here locally, or had as many buyers coming to me with that situation. But on the other end, and I think the bigger question is, as far as building a cottage cluster, I think that if you're doing what Carl says and kind of doing it with a community in mind, is coming together with that community and discussing that vision, and seeing who else might have that same vision and passion to build something together. So starting within, if you've got your own community that you want to build that for, would be wonderful. There are a couple, I've got a group with a lot of local investors. And so it might be a situation where, get connected with somebody else that's thinking about investing or has money to invest, and kind of coming together as well. So that might be an opportunity. Trying to think of some other good ways. It's one of those things that if this is an idea, also start looking at land, talking to an agent or two as well, and kind of looking at this, start putting the plan together. But it's one of those things, put it out to the world, put that vision out, talk to as many people as possible, and make it a reality. I haven't, besides the occasional call, and it's not really centered in town, I have heard and talked to several people over time that say, I want to go out and kind of set up this community of small homes. But so far, none of those have been specifically centered in city limits for Corvallis. But contact me, and I'll, love the minute you say something is the minute you hear somebody else talking about it. So yeah, I'd love to have you give me your contact information, and as soon as I hear of other people or start putting it out to other people as well, I'd love to help connect.
Great.
And if I can put a pitch in, if you're thinking about doing something like this, go down and talk to our planning department. We have some great people that can help you, guide you through the code to get something like this worked out. And if there's real big roadblocks into what you see, bring it in front of the city, to the planning commission, to the city council, have planning department work with you on that. Don't be afraid of our planning department. There are some really, really good people down there that want to see this city diversify in housing types, and they will try and work with you within the confines. They are confined by our laws, but our laws aren't written in stone and can be changed. So if you have a great idea, please bring it. I'd love to see some examples of these going in Corvallis.
Great. I have a question here, maybe two questions tied together. One is acknowledging that House Bill 2001 also required cities to look at reducing SDCs, or system development charges, or permit fees, to encourage middle housing construction. And so there's a question on sort of where is Corvallis right now related to system development charges. And then maybe related, there's a question about lowering property taxes as well.
Sure, that's probably mine. So the Corvallis is actually the other piece in there that wasn't mentioned, is starting a construction excise tax as well. And Corvallis has actually been fairly far out front on some of these issues. We were the #2 city to put the construction excise tax in place, and we also have, which is a fund that allows you to build affordable housing, and the development that occurs in town generates those revenues. But we also have put in place a system development charge waiver for affordable housing. So people can come in, like Carl was mentioning, if somebody wants to do an affordable ADU in their backyard, or something, or a duplex or something, come talk to us and we can help walk you through that process. As far as the property tax pieces, that's a thing that's very interesting and exciting about middle housing. Is one of the things that people have not fully comprehended is single family homes generally don't pay their own way. And particularly when you get to single family homes in rural kind of development, large lots. And so over the life of that building, it generally doesn't generate enough property taxes to even deal with the sidewalk and street repair in front that has to occur over time. Middle housing, by putting more units and more kind of income generator, because more people in the same size building, even as more people generating income, then you do have now a type of development that is sustainable over the long haul. And when you do need to rebuild a road, you have generated enough property taxes for that. So sprawl is very, very tax inefficient and will drive up your property taxes.
Carl, it looked like you wanted this.
I was going to say, on that note, there's a very interesting thing for climate on what Paul just mentioned, and that's roads. If you look at the amount of land dedicated to a road in some of these more rural neighborhoods, it's a huge amount of land just to do the roads and the right of ways. And getting that, as we densify, that percentage of land per person goes down that we're dedicating to asphalt. And so that's another big thought on climate, is we're not paving over quite so much of our land to drive cars on.
Great. Looks like a question kind of hopping back to the affordability discussion, which is calculating that 30% of your income spent on rent or your mortgage. And the person said, college students aren't included in this HUD median income of $57,000 for a single or $81,000 for a family of four. So why aren't university student incomes included in determining the area median income on which we then base affordability on?
Yeah, the federal government, students are difficult for the federal government programs because they operate because of the student loan aspect and everything. They generally spend more than 100% of their income on housing. And that doesn't work in any world except a student population. And so HUD tries to take that data distortion out of the equation. We do end up, though, sometimes, like when we look at our number as being the most unaffordable community in the state, the way the state calculates their numbers, that student population does hurt us on that because they don't have a large income, but they have a high rent level. And so it's not surprising that the top unaffordable cities are us and Eugene and Ashland and places like that. So it is difficult, but it's just, I think the feds have just realized that it's just not a data, it's a data problem they can't solve. And so they exclude.
I have a couple questions here about this kind of difference between middle housing for renters versus middle housing for building equity. And as we look at the future of middle housing, where we're at right now, and also the future, are there ways to help people that want to build equity through our upcoming middle housing changes?
I would think we very much so. Most of these building types can be rented or they could be owned, right? Duplexes, triplexes, all of those have methods to be wholly owned and build equity, but they also have the methodologies to be rented. And a lot of cities, you see duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, where the owner lives in one of the units and rents the others. So not only building equity, they're also building an income stream. And I think they are suitable for both very easily.
I think that the state also put a piece in there to try to encourage that to convert from rental to owner. There's a part that people don't pay too much attention about in this House bill, but it allows greater ability to divide multifamily projects into individual lots and they can be sold. So if there's an existing rental triplex, for instance, or a duplex, the path has been smoothed by this bill to splitting that up and then selling each side individually without having to do condominiums and all those other things.
Follow-up question kind of related to taxes, but does the way we tax vacant land encourage that land being held rather than developed?
Yes, we don't have any kind of a vacant land penalty. You can hold it for as long as you'd like to.
Let's see, we're getting to the end of our allotted time. I believe that we have covered most of the questions that have come in. I've lumped a few of those topics together and have addressed all of those topics that have come in so far. But I do want to just kind of zoom out because there are a couple of questions in here, maybe less about middle housing and just more about development in general. But the balance between available resources, including water, and in our community, and how does that come into the equation in planning for development and maybe near term, but also maybe a longer term scale?
Sure. The resources for things like water, there's a master planning process that goes on. In fact, we're in the middle of our water master plan at this time, where you are projecting out where are your water resources, what is the sustainability of that water resource, what are the threats, and making sure that there is enough water for the projected growth that you have going on. But I do want to, when we get this kind of with climate too, and I think one of the things people have to remember is population control doesn't necessarily solve that problem. You know, when we look at how much greenhouse gas one of us produces, as soon as we are born, we are now contributing to that. And so population control works at the global stage, but having someone live in Albany versus Corvallis doesn't reduce Corvallis's carbon footprint, and it generally increases if they're driving and those other things. So you know, we have to watch how we work that ledger a little bit.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you so much for everybody that attended this evening, as well as our speakers, for your time, for your interest and passion for our community. And a special thanks to the Housing Committee and the Community Planning Committee within the League of Women Voters for putting on this program. Again, I want to note that it is being recorded and will be available probably in the next week when I get it on the YouTube channel. And we will also be able to put the PDFs of the slides and the links available onto the League of Women Voters website. So thank you everybody for attending, and a special thanks to our speakers this evening. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.